John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hello, my name is John Ulzheimer. I am a consumer credit expert. I have almost 30 years of experience in the credit industry. I've spent time at FICO, which is one of the two generally recognized credit scoring brands used in the United States, and Equifax, which is one of the three generally recognized credit reporting agencies. And so today we're going to talk about what is a bad credit score and how do you end up with a bad credit score. So this question, there's a lot of meat on the bone with respect to this question of what is a bad credit score. Some lenders are going to have very different tolerances, what they consider to be a good score and a bad score. Some lenders may see a 680 and think, hey, that's a good score. Some lenders may see a 680 and say, that's a bad score. So there's no universal answer to what is a good score versus what is a bad score. But generally speaking, the credit scoring systems in the United States are scaled or have a range between 300 to 850. Obviously, there's some exceptions to that, but the general rule is 300 to 850, and the higher you are to 850, or the closer that you are to 850, the more likely you're going to be perceived as having a good score. The closer you are to the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, the more likely you are going to be perceived as high risk because your credit score is not as good as it could be. So let's talk about a couple of thresholds, because ultimately the lender is what determines what is a good credit score versus what is a bad credit score. And here are some general rules. In the US, the dividing line between prime and subprime appears to be at or near 680. So you may be thinking, hey, I have a score above 680, that means I have good credit. Not so fast. The average FICO score right now is 711. So even if you have a score of 700, which a lot of people have this kind of perception that that's a good score, you don't even have the average score in the US. The VantageScore credit score, the average is closer to 675 than it is to 711. And so even if you're between kind of like 675 to 710-ish, then you're just at average or just slightly above average, depending on the scoring platform that's being used. In the US, most lenders will give you the best deal that they have to offer if you've got a score of at least a 720 or at least a 760, depending on what you're applying for. That if you've got scores in the 680 and below range, and then really when you start getting into the low 600s and then even the 500s, these are universally considered to be bad scores. I don't know of any lender that would look at a credit score of 580 and say, oh, that's a good score, or 600 and say, hey, that's a good score. These are absolutely not considered to be good scores. It is more appropriate to refer to them as being bad scores. You are at least 200 points off the national average in one scoring platform and almost 200 points below the national average with the other scoring platform. And so obviously being so far below average is absolutely not considered to be good. So how did you get here, right? So it's not easy to have a credit score in the 500s. It's really not easy to have a credit score in the 400s. I mean, you really have to work hard to earn credit scores that low because you really have to do almost everything wrong with respect to how you're managing your credit. But generally speaking, people have bad credit scores because they have derogatory entries on their credit reports and they have either a lot of debt or debt that's in default or something having to do with the mismanagement of their debt. And when I'm talking about debt, I'm not talking about things like mortgage loans and auto loans and student loans. Those are installment type loans, fixed payment, fixed period of time. That type of debt seems to be more stable or tends to be more stable because a lot of that debt is secured by some physical asset like your house or your car or your motorcycle. You don't want to lose that stuff. So people will tend to find a way to pay that kind of debt. What I'm talking about here is the stuff in the shape of that, a credit card. The credit card debt is most of the time unsecured. It's higher risk, which is why you end up paying 17 and 18% APR, even if you've got good credit. So the debt is really a problem, but more so revolving debt, credit card debt, and it's really only a problem if you have a lot of cards with balances and you have balances that are too close to the credit limits. That's called utilization or revolving utilization, and there's a ratio and you don't want that ratio to be too high. Derogatory entries are the biggest problem as it pertains to bad credit scores. People don't have credit scores in the 500 because they have credit card debt and a couple of inquiries. People have credit scores in the 500 because they have derogatory entries on their credit reports. And so this is going to be things like bankruptcy, collection accounts, account information that indicates some sort of a terminal delinquency or severe mismanagement of the account, high-level late payments, repossessions, foreclosures, settlements, charge-offs. All of those things indicate some form of a terminal delinquency or default on a credit obligation, and that's what's going to end you with scores that look like that versus scores that look like that. So some of this stuff is actionable, meaning if you can afford to pay off your debt, then if you pay off your debt, your credit scores will improve almost immediately. However, if you have derogatory entries, it takes much longer to rectify those issues because federal law allows most negative entries to remain on a credit report for 7 years unless it's a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and that's 10 years. And so there's a real problem with respect to improving a credit score that is low because of a lot of derogatory entries. It's just going to take some time. You have to be realistic with your expectations. You're not going to turn a 500 into an 850 in a month. It's just simply not something that you're systemically capable of doing unless you have a bunch of stuff on your credit report that is simply not yours, like you've been a victim of some wide-scale, true name, credit-related identity theft. Otherwise, it's just going to take you time to rebuild. So this is generally what's considered to be bad. I kind of look at this from a glass half empty perspective. In my mind, any credit score is a bad credit score if it causes you to not get the best deal that the lender has to offer. So even though 720, 740 may seem like a great score, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to get the best deal, especially on a mortgage loan. Auto loan, a 700 might seem like a great credit score. Not only is it below average, but it doesn't mean you're going to get the best deal on an auto loan. So I really like to kind of exceed the minimum scoring requirements by so much that you don't have to really concern yourself with, well, a few points here, a few points there, I'm good versus a bad credit risk. So if you have any questions about whether or not your credit score is a good score or a bad score, drop them in the comments section below. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.